right, welcome back to another episode of Marketing Corner.
Whoop, whoop.
And today, this is episode 97, and this is a special one.
Yes.
Because we have a guest.
In person.
In person. So if you're not watching while you're listening to this, you can't tell. But we actually have an in-person
It's an audio
guest.
format, but there's someone here with us.
It's not an AI voice.
It's not an AI voice, right? No. And today we have a cool friend of mine coming by, Mikael Aagaard. And yes. I present this because I'm the Dane, so I can say the name without fucking it up.
Should I do the American?
No, please don't. Okay, do it. Try.
Michael Aagaard.
Yeah. Okay.
Pretty good.
We got there.
Nailed it.
And
10 years here, people. 10 years.
And if you're known in Denmark, or if you've been to any marketing conference before, then you probably have seen Michael. He's spoken at more than I have, which is not a small feat. and he's usually, and I've always been fascinated at how good he is at it. So, without further ado, would you like to just briefly introduce yourself, Michael, for the listeners?
Sure. Well, Mikael Aagaard, Michael Aagaard, Michael Aagaard, whatever you prefer.
It, yeah.
Michael
all good with me. It's all good with me. Well, I'm one of these, I guess, dinosaurs now in the business. I've been around for a while. I've been doing this full time since 2008.
Then that qualifies as a dinosaur.
Yes,
yeah,
I think so. I'm
Yeah.
trying to stay relevant. So thank you for inviting me. It's always good to hang out with the young folks.
Try to do some outreach. Do some community outreach to the elderly. Yes.
To the elderly. Thank you. Yeah, you contact the reception at the home.
Yes. Send us someone from Michael.
Cool. Yeah, good. But so I've been around for a while, and I've been doing CRO since 2008, and seen a lot of changes and developments along the way, and I've had quite a journey. Still hanging on.
Still hanging on. And for the folks at home, CRO.
Yeah, well, conversion rate optimization, I mean, whatever you want to call it, growth, experimentation. I kind of say CRO a lot, I think, because that's just what it was when I started. I don't. There's all of these debates about what it should be called, and what's debates about what's the difference between CRO and growth and experimentation and stuff. And I don't care too much about what we call it. I mean, for me, the main thing is that it's a process we use to make better business decisions by, basing it on research and validation and experimentation. That's what I would define it as. And
that was a pretty good definition.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, had me convinced there.
And I don't. To me, it's to me it doesn't really make sense to have kind of like categories of it's only CRO if you're if you're optimizing any social media channels or email or something, then it's not CRO or this or that. I think the one thing about the title conversion rate optimization, which is not beneficial and kind of misleading, is the conversion rate part, because it kind of has a tendency to make people obsess about the conversion rate, which is of course a metric that is important, but it's not the only one, and you can make bad decisions if that's the only thing you're looking at.
It's a really good point. Like, people have a tendency sometimes to, like, just because it has a name, then it's like, this is the box it fits in, right?
Exactly,
like, you put it in a box, and then you never let it out of that box.
Exactly.
That's a good point.
And for me, it's always, I mean, well, not always. I had to go through a process of learning a bunch of stuff, but in the more mature part of my career, the research part has always been extremely important to me. Moving away from the guessing and the kind of just relying on the fact that we're marketers and we should know everything, which we absolutely do not.
What? Speak for yourself, Michael.
And we just, all the listeners just dropped out here.
So we're going to deep dive into CRO and all the stuff that you do in the next episode. So I want to I don't want to have any spoilers for that, but I'd love to hear how you got to that point, how you, and kind of where you're at now. Like, let's learn a little bit about your journey.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I guess what's a little bit different about, well, there's several things I think that are different about my path, but one of them being that as I mentioned, I started doing this in 2008, so very different scene than now. And back then it was just, there was like one book by the Eisenberg brothers, I think, at that point in time, which was like teaching your cat to bark, I think it was.
Okay.
And there was like Google.
I've never seen that, actually.
No.
Okay.
No, that's a.
Oh, and there maybe Always Be Testing was also, maybe they also published that, but very few people were dabbling with it. And Google had one free tool you could use for A/B tests and stuff. And I was working at an agency doing SEO at that point in time, or I'd been doing that for several years leading up to it, and then one of the things I realized was we generated tons of traffic, but a lot of that traffic didn't really convert, didn't turn into money, which always seemed a bit weird to me because like clients were paying a lot of money for us to just throw traffic at the site.
Yeah.
And then it was like, but what happens after that? You know, this seems quite short-sighted. And I was very much into copywriting, and one of the things that got me into SEO was like it was one of the first things where you had like concrete evidence of what copy can do. Because before that, it was more of an argument of, well, you need good communication, otherwise your brand is gonna look stupid and so on, and you should be able to, you know, use correct grammar, which are not like super strong arguments.
Right.
And then, I got into the whole aspect of optimizing the user journey after people get to the site. And then, to me, it was just fascinating with A/B testing that you could have a somewhat scientific process behind it and get actual answers to, you know, whether the things you came up with were actually.
And I feel like it takes like a bit of a curious nature to get that. I also like. I think that's also how I've started. I'm not a crow expert like you are in the same way, but like you start with asking the right questions. I feel like that sounds a bit to me like that's how you got started. It was like you were asking like, is this actually working? We're sending all this traffic here. Is this actually working? And that got you on the path to actually figure out.
Yeah, exactly. It was just looking at it and seeing that it wasn't a great return on investment.
No, exactly. No,
a lot of these clients, and so I just became fascinated by that and thought, well, how do we tag on the next part? And then I kind of got more and more into that, and then after a couple of years at the agency, I decided to like go solo. And just got more and more into the whole optimization aspect of things, and then had the opportunity to work with a bunch of different clients and so on. In the beginning, I was doing kind of a mix of SEO and some content marketing and stuff, and just started focusing more and more on the conversion part. That was kind of where my passion was. And then worked with a bunch of different clients, and I worked for some different agencies in and out. And for a while, I worked with Unbounce, SaaS company, landing page builder in Canada. So I lived for 5 years in Canada. I came back to Denmark, and I always kind of end up being self-employed. I guess that's just my personality.
I was like, is there a reason for that?
Yeah, I'm not too good with bosses. I found out. Yeah,
I'm not too good with bosses, and I'm still employed. Wait a minute.
Well, maybe you're. Yeah, I think my problem is I get emotionally invested, and it's hard for me to leave that behind. And if I don't completely agree with everything at the company, it stresses me out. I think it's hard for me to be full on part of it. No,
I totally get that. Trust me, that's why I'm here.
But one of the things I did two of the things I did that was a big part of my career, and which was, I guess, way more difficult, but also easier back in the day, was I just started blogging a lot about kind of the work I was doing, and that was one of the interesting things about doing a lot of experiments. Was I had a lot of experiments I could publish on my blog and say, so I tested this against this, and
that stuff I've always found incredibly valuable. There's so many thought leaders out there who are so theoretical, and I love it when there's something that's like, because I did something similar where I gated everything and then ungated and then gated, and I was like, this is what I saw, and I think that's. That's more powerful for us marketers of like, there's proof in the pudding, as we would say, right?
Absolutely. Evidence-based, whatever you want to call it.
That's probably more accurate than proof is in the pudding, but yeah.
And at that point in time, I mean, I think like content marketing and blogging stuff wasn't nowhere near as big as it is now. It's not nearly as noisy, so it's a little bit easier to kind of carve a space for yourself.
Yeah, a blog mattered back then. Right?
Yeah,
not a lot of people had a blog.
No.
Today, if you were to say, "Hey, I had a blog today," I'm like, "Okay, who doesn't?"
No, it's wild. It is.
Right?
It is pretty wild. Yeah. And we did. I mean, again, and we also have to remember that the social media, like this, was before even MySpace and so on.
Exactly.
So we didn't have all those outlets.
No.
So establishing a blog and trying to get out there. And then I started doing it in English and got a bit of an international audience and started getting invited to some conferences to speak in the U.S. And then that really helped accelerate my career, I guess, and my reach, the networking I got from speaking abroad. And then for part of my career that was kind of a strategy of mine was I'll go anywhere on the planet where people invite me to speak, as long as they pay my expenses. So yeah, just
where do you like? What was the craziest place you ever been sent to talk to?
Well, I don't know if the place itself was the craziest. It was for me, especially at that point in time. I guess it was exotic, but it was more the fact that I had my time traveling was like 3 times the length of my actual stay there. So I went to Jakarta at one point and spoke. There's actually a funny story there if you want to hear it.
I am all for it.
So,
Go for it.
So I was invited to speak at this marketing conference, and if it were today, I would probably be like, I'm not sure I'm the right speaker and so on. But then I was like, yes, just send me. And I said yes before I'd realized, like, I don't know, maybe it's easier these days to get there. Back then, it was like 26 to 30 hours or something crazy to get there. And so long journey, layovers and everything. I got there and then essentially just slept and got up the next morning, waited for a bit, did my talk, flew home in the evening, and then had another like 30 hours.
So how was Jakarta?
Yeah. No idea. Traffic. I saw a lot of traffic, which was kind of scary.
Yeah.
I've never seen that much traffic in my life before, and then the hotel was very nice. But the thing was, so before I went on stage, I was looking at all these people in the room, and I was like, none of us are native English speakers, and I'm just this dude from Denmark doing this thing, and I'm kind of like a little bit different than everybody else there, and I've got a deck with all this experimentation stuff, and how am I going to break the ice? How I'm going to connect with these folks, and I was just thinking how I'm going to do that in my intro, and then like minutes before I went on stage, I was talking to someone, and he asked me where I was from, and I said I'm from Denmark, and he went, Denmark. I was like, what? And he said, Michael learns to rock.
No.
And so I don't know if you get.
I've heard
Okay.
other people who have had similar situations
really?
when
Okay.
they've gone overseas.
Okay.
People at Michael learns
So
to
there
rock
was this
or-
band from the early 90s in Denmark that was called Michael Learns to Rock. And of course, my name's Michael too. But it turns out they were huge.
Yes.
Like-
Yeah, they're huge in Asia.
Yeah, in Indonesia especially. And
Exactly.
and even because they had been gone in Denmark for a long time when I
Mm.
spoke there. This was, I can't remember what it was, maybe 2013 or something, but they were still relevant there. So they'd been there at like playing at tsunami relief concerts and stuff.
Oh wow.
So I was like, yes, this is my connection. So when I went on stage, I was kind of my opening. Yeah, my name is Michael, and I'm from Denmark. Michael Learns to Rock, and then like everybody looked at on stage like, yeah, remember that song?
Yeah.
Remember that song? I'm not an actor. I'm
Yeah.
not. And then I had the full attention of the whole room. I was like, yes, this is
There you
awesome.
go.
Got it.
That's- Now I know. Sorry, I've recovered memory. I was just in Thailand for November.
Okay.
And when people heard we live in Denmark, it was
No
like
way!
Yeah. So still to
Really?
this day that they were like, Michael, Learns to Rock. And I didn't get it at the time, and then of course I needed explaining to it. So
That is
yeah,
so
it's big
funny.
over there.
It's
that's
wild.
That's your claim to fame. Congrats.
Yeah,
Denmark, good
yeah.
job.
Okay. Yeah.
You gotta remember that. But then one thing I learned from that also was that whenever I do talks now, I have a set intro, but I'm always looking for something spur of the moment kind of thing that I can use to make a connection or establish some kind of humor. So that was just one of the things I learned from that gig.
Yeah.
But that's also like, as far as I understand, that's also like a lot of what you do today. Is that like is public speaking, right? There's a big part of it, right?
Oh, definitely. So public speaking has been a huge part of my career in the sense that it really helped me establish a name for myself in the business, in the industry. And then it later on became kind of a career on its own. So I've usually get paid now to speak. And I do a lot of speaker coaching also. So it's been a big passion of mine. It's something I take very seriously, and now I'm very passionate about kind of helping others do the same thing.
How do you go about something like that? Like first of all, when did you reach the point where like, now I'm confident enough to feel like I can coach other people to speak?
That's a great question. I guess I kind of just bumped into it. I'd probably been doing it for about 10 years at that point in time, and just quick side note.
Yeah, go for it.
I was always, I kind of reinvented myself at some point as a speaker, because in the beginning it was, I had all these case studies and stuff, and I was kind of regurgitating the same material and just slightly changing the angle and changing the title. Yeah. And I was kind of against practicing rehearsing too much, because I wanted it to be a little bit like spontaneous and so on, which can heavily backfire. If you're in good form on the day, it can be really cool, and if not, it can backfire heavily. And also, I was just kind of this, high energy wild man on stage, like speed talking through all these examples, and people love the energy and so on. But I realized that people couldn't really tell one talk from the other. They're like, oh, I've seen you do this before. I'm like, no, this is a completely new talk. And so at some point, I had a couple of experiences on stage that I didn't really enjoy, and I saw a couple of other speakers where I was like, wow, like they got this elaborate storyline, and they got all these jokes, and they've really put time into having awesome slide decks and stuff. And then at that point, I was like, and I can't remember what this was. 2014 maybe, and at that point I thought I really have to step up my game, and so I started focusing much more on having a structure to the talk, a storyline, knowing exactly what I wanted people to understand, and so on, having an actual intro, an actual outro, and all that stuff. And also one of the things I started practicing was speaking a lot slower, because if I'm going at 95 or 100%, a lot of people are just like, whoa, the hairdryer.
Yeah. Especially if they're not a native, English speaker, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And especially if it's like technical or something, right?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I've spoken so many times as well, and I found that whenever I speak fast and about something technical, in the feedback I always get like, this was awesome, but I had no idea what it was about. It was like I couldn't keep up,
Take
right?
it from a 12 to a 7.
Yeah,
exactly. And I think if you're a natural speed talker, then if you dial it down to 80%, for you it feels like you're going hello.
Yeah.
Oh. But for the audience, it's very reasonable.
Absorb it a bit
Yeah.
better.
For them it doesn't sound particularly slow. But anyway, so I put a ton of effort into just becoming better, and I decided this is kind of the path forward for me. Every single time I do a talk, I'm going to try to be better than last time, and so on, and try to really pay attention to the feedback and speaker scores and all that kind of stuff. So I think that was part of what then made me a better speaker and made me more confident in my material. And then I think when I started working at Unbounce, because I'd done a lot of speaking, people there kind of asked me for advice, and then I reasonably quit. Oh yeah, and then another factor was Ollie Gardner, who I worked with at Unbounce, who's incredibly talented speaker. He coached me quite a bit and really helped me, like really become a much better speaker. He just had such great advice for me, and just very specific stuff that I could really implement and use. And then I saw the value in that, and then started helping other people, and then just kind of became a bigger thing for me. Yeah,
That's amazing. I'm so jealous.
But I think another part of the as far as the speaker coaching thing that I have going for me is I'm not necessarily a particularly good teacher or anything like that, but I've just done so much public speaking myself that I can empathize with anything they're going through. Essentially, I've tried,
You've
virtually
been there.
anything, so I really understand where they're coming from, and I have advice for them, and I can feel their pain or whatever. And also I've practiced a lot on how to give advice and stuff, and be direct, because you have to. That's the only way. But also be diplomatic about it, and actually deliver it in a way that people listen and absorb it, and don't get upset.
Don't run off crying.
Yes.
I have both Jen and I, and then you, of course, we've all done a lot of talks, and I've some of these talks you get feedback, right? And I found something. I want to ask you a question more like, so if I let's say I do a talk, I had a talk where I did, I don't know, 60 people or something, and then you like overall pretty good, but you get some negative ones, like 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever. And of course, you don't remember the 55 that fucking loved it. You remember the 5 that hated it.
Yes.
It's life,
right.
In general.
How do you personally, like, how much of those 5 do you take into account? Like, how much do you change based on those 5? And I'm guessing you've tried something similar.
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and it is a very challenging thing. And like overall, I think as far as reading the feedback, it can be very difficult. And I know a lot of speakers who just don't read feedback.
Really?
Yeah, which to me is kind of bizarre. I mean,
that's a little bit bizarre. That's weird to me too.
To me, that's like saying I don't pay attention to my users on the site because
exactly.
I know.
Like this is your audience, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm one. I'll read all of it, even though it's torture and so on. And
it is torture sometimes.
Yeah, and I think there is a negativity bias, and we have a tendency to linger on the negative rather than the positive. So that's part of being a human being. But I think it depends on so one of the things that's rough about getting feedback in a written format like that is you can't talk to the person.
Yeah.
No. So you kind of feel like you're being attacked. And especially if they got something wrong and you're criticizing you for that, and you're kind of talking to the screen like, no,
this is not how it works.
Yeah, exactly. So I think part of it is
that's a good point.
part of it is also seeing like, is there something I can learn for this?
Yeah.
And I've become much better at it. I remember some years ago, I could obsess about negative comments for weeks and really be angry and go through all the stages of grief. You're like, first you're like, no, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Denial.
Yeah, denial and everything. And then by the end, you're like, maybe that's a good point.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things is looking at, is there recurring negative feedback? Because then you should probably listen to it. And also, is it just, is it completely useless feedback? Like I've gotten comments like, this was neither entertaining nor educational. And you're like, Jesus,
Wow.
okay.
Brutal and like, what do I do from here?
For having
Like,
attended this.
Yeah, exactly,
oh
right.
God.
Yeah.
I haven't had that one, but
So I think that it's a question of kind of, seeing, is it just someone who's angry, and is this something I can use or I can't? And then also, there's a big difference between if you have 100 people giving you feedback and 50 of them were really hard on you. That's probably a sign that you
should listen.
Yeah, and that maybe you weren't doing the right thing for that audience. Maybe if you get a couple, that's just part of life, I think. But it does suck. So I think a part of it is coping with it, and then also, like I said, seeing if it's just anger, and then I mean I'm personally the type of speaker where usually most people really enjoy what I do, and I'm very often highest rated, or at least in the top 3. But I almost always have a couple of people who just hate me. So I for some reason, that's part of my personality, that I can kind of satisfy most people. But then there's a couple who are just like, you are the worst. So I've kind
they're
of...
not happy in anything. That's what I'll just tell myself.
That might be. But so
miserable.
I kind of mentally prepare these days.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'm going to read this feedback now. I know that there are going to be some people out there who are going to be really hard and nasty.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to mentally prepare.
Yeah.
And then it's easier to read that. And then if there are none, I'm like, wow,
That's great.
great.
That's great.
See, I'm not.
So,
I guess in my case, I haven't had like too brutal. I've had like talk a little too fast or something like that. But one thing that used to throw me a lot was when I'm on stage, people's reactions, seeing people's faces.
Yes,
So one of the
yes.
things I started doing is I just look in the back. Like so I'm looking just over your head, because I remember one time I was speaking at the Art of Social, I think, or maybe it was Compo or something, but I was talking about how GDPR was coming in and it was going to change everything. And this one guy in the front was just like violently shaking his head like, no, bitch, and I just remember being like, and totally just tripped me up.
No, I get that.
So I think, it's more like not so much the feedback after, but even in the moment, or at Tech Barbecue when you have different things running at the same time. People get up in the middle of your talk and walk out, and you're like, shit, what did I do? Like,
I think part of that
Pulling that
experience
back.
is, especially for new speakers, I think that can be really, really rough. But I have some advice.
Yes,
specifically for
and
that.
I think we'd love to have a couple of your
Go
top
for it.
tips, but
Yeah.
maybe
So-
this is one.
Well, and this one is I'm actually about to record a short video for LinkedIn about this. So I love that you asked that question.
Great.
But a couple of things you can do there. So I would personally say that eye contact with the audience is extremely important. So I would probably, if I were coaching you, I'd steer you away from not looking at the audience and looking, at
The dot.
the wall.
Yeah, look at like the clock or whatever in the back. So it's
But what you can do is, I would call it using positive audience anchors.
okay.
So that means that there's always going to be some people in the audience who are really engaged and who really enjoy what you're doing. So as soon as you get on stage, you try to identify these folks, right?
Who are your allies?
And then you
Yes.
and then you have to be careful that you're just not talking to one person, because then that's going to be weird for the rest of the audience. It might also be slightly weird for the person that you're like eyeballing the whole way through.
What do you think,
So-
Bettina? Huh? You like it?
So what you can do is kind of divide the audience into three sections. So you have middle, right. This is my right hand, right and left. And then what you can do is have 3 positive audience anchors. So you identify one, and so that means that you can look from
around.
left to right. You can stop here. And then in that way, most of the audience is not going to realize that you're not, that you're actually only looking at 3 people. But then you can be more dynamic. You can move around the stage, and you can shift your gaze. But you can kind of, anchor on these people. And it's quite incredible what we can do. I've done that myself. If someone I'm coaching is speaking, I'll be in there in the front row, and I'll be like,
You're the anchor, the hype man.
Yeah,
You're the
totally.
hype man.
And it really
That's great.
makes a big difference, and I hear that a lot from them afterwards also. So
It's good
that is
also
a way to...
It's like
to cope with
barbecue
it.
and stuff. Like there's always someone I know in the crowd.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know, and like I know you were at my talk at
At
Sassiest. You know, so it was like
that
I
was a
knew I
very
had
dark room.
It
Though.
was very dark.
I was
couldn't
trying
see
to look.
shit.
I was
That's
like,
annoying.
couldn't see anything. Right.
It was a little easier though to look at
Yeah.
people because
Yeah.
I couldn't really see if people were like.
But I think
making
it's
faces.
what I and then there's a slightly more advanced version of that where the people who maybe look well. Another thing is just realizing that it's very hard to actually gauge how into it people are from the look on their face. Well, obviously people are laughing and smiling and stuff, but there's folks there who just be dead serious and thinking
face.
he hates it, and then afterwards they come up and say I loved it.
Yeah,
so
true.
realizing that I think is important also. But there's another technique I sometimes use, which is I'll deliberately,
Look at the grumpy one.
exactly, and speak directly to them until they react or they go like
Like
start
me,
smiling.
like me.
Yeah,
Okay.
and
Forced.
and then I think another thing, but that one thing I always say when I coach is it's very important that you're true to yourself and that you don't try to do anything that's not natural to you. So you can. I never try to turn people into a version of me,
Right.
but one thing that works for me and is part of my stage presence and speaker personality is just getting right up to the edge of the stage, essentially. So I'm just like, right there in
You're a pretty
people's
tall
faces.
guy too.
Sure.
I imagine it's a kind of intimidating.
Well,
If you're not looking at this like video, like Michael looks a bit like a Viking,
Yeah,
like
he's
a
very
real Viking, right?
A real Viking.
Yeah.
But I think stuff like that can help as far as and if you're smiling and you're using open body language and you're an engaging personality and then you're right on the edge of the stage, like you to me anyways, that helps kind of close the distance and also in a way makes people go like, oh wow, this guy's really paying attention to, he's really like paying attention
Really
to me, so I
engaged.
should probably also pay attention to him. So anyways,
Okay. It's great.
I have one question. Can I
Yes.
fire a question?
Yeah, of course.
go
Yeah.
for it. Okay. So, because so I've seen you talk before, Michael, and I've always been fascinated. You're really good at, just for the audience listening, but Michael's really good at the like storytelling. I always felt like
Thank
you're
you,
really
thank
good
you.
at the story and bringing the personal anecdotes, and you're really good at making it funny.
Thank you.
But what I personally struggle with is whenever I've been invited to talks, it's always like I'm always invited as the growth hacker, like, and always
sure.
I'm supposed to be the technical guy.
That's you're
And
pigeonholed.
I'm
into-
pigeonholed a little bit
Yeah.
into that, and what I'm struggling with sometimes is just like, how do I remain technical? Because people come for the technical stuff. They want the the hacks and all that stuff. But at the same time, also have people who get in the audience, and when they get feedback afterwards, like this was really awesome. I didn't get any of it, and that's because they might not have been my audience originally. How do you navigate that? Because I always feel like you talk about. Don't get me wrong, Jen and I, we get
Sure.
cold, but I get everything you're talking about, but there would probably be people in the audience who don't get all
Sure.
the stuff you're talking about.
Sure. Well, okay, so some generic advice and some advice specifically for you.
Yes, go
so
for
I
it.
think one of the things I've noticed when I've, for example, your talk at Conversion Boost,
Yes.
I think one of the things there was you just packed so much.
So much, right?
So I think that is one of the
Value
things
bomb.
and I understand. I used to do that. I understand where you're coming from because you're like, I'm going to give them everything, so much value.
Yeah.
But that has a tendency to backfire because then people are just like, whoa, overload.
Yeah,
So
that's
I'd probably dial back a little bit and say, what are some of the most essential parts here? What are a couple of ideas I want to convey?
That hurts in a good way.
Yeah, right. You got to be direct.
Yeah,
right?
I love
Just
it.
talked about the feedback.
I
you
was-
know,
I
so
love
give
it.
feedback.
But then the other
So
thing
right.
is, I have a very simple kind of a framework I use for my own talks and I use to teach others. So I think of it, I divide it into 3 acts, like a movie script. And so Act 1 is your opening, which is going to be maybe 10% of the talk, 5 to 10% of the talk or something. Then you have Act 2, which is like the core, the meat. And that's going to be like maybe 80%. And then you have Act 3, which is the outro, closing down, getting, and that's going to be maybe 5% or something. My math might be off. You understand what I mean? And then
it ends up being 100.
yeah, and then of course Act 2 is extremely important, but Act 1 and 3 are also extremely important. You can't,
No.
really
neglect them.
important. So if we start with Act 2, the core, what I recommend for a 30 to 40 minute talk, which is what you normally do at conferences, is have 3 sections. So 3 overall ideas or whatever you want to convey, 3 overall sections. You can have more under each, but stick to 3 main things that you want to convey, right? So that could be something like, well, I did a talk about confirmation bias. So that was like introducing what is confirmation bias, then it would be typical pitfalls, and then what to do about it. So there's a logical progression there that people can follow, right? So that helps you kind of just to stay on point, and it gives you enough content that is interesting and is valuable, but it keeps you from going overboard. You know, so you're not doing 20 tips for this or that in 30 minutes. And then as far as the storytelling parts, in Act 1, what I recommend doing, what I always do, is I open with a story.
Yeah.
And I make that story relevant to the content, to the topic.
Yeah.
Personally, I try to make it just weird enough and just off topic enough that people start wondering, like, where's he going with this? And then right at that moment, I try to bring it in and then talk about why this connects to what we're talking about here. And then that's kind of your overall problem statement. Then that leads you into saying, this was the case here, perspectivizing. And then from there, you can intro Act 2, where you're saying, so for the rest of the talk, I'm going to, talk more about what confirmation bias is, common pitfalls for marketers, what we can do about it.
That's
and then you
great
go
tip.
into Act 2. If you can, very powerful beginning if you can get people to laugh within the first minute you're on stage.
Okay.
Because, that really sets everything up.
That
disarming.
breaks down some barriers, right?
It does. But you have to, another thing that you have to do in Act 1 is you have to give people a little taste of who you are as a speaker and what to expect. Yeah. But you have to be true to that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if you're hilarious in your opening and you're super boring for the rest of it, that's not going to be good, right?
Starters, you mean to go on, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Keep it going. Yeah.
And then Act 3 is closing, and a big mistake one big mistake that I see a lot of people, I think is a big mistake a lot of people make in Act 1 in the intro is they essentially repeat exactly what the MC just said. So the MC goes, next on stage is this person, this is the person's name, this is who they work for, this is the work they do, this is the people they've worked for, blah, blah,
And you
blah.
spend 2 minutes doing the exact
And then
same
you
thing.
do exactly the same thing, right?
Get it.
And the first 2 important minutes, right?
Yeah,
So just cut that, go straight into the story.
Yeah.
And then for Act 3, closing down, often that's just maybe a little repeating, one paragraph saying, so the most important takeaways from what we just covered is this, this, and that. And then you might have some kind of closing words or call to action. And then if you can, do a throwback to Act 1, the opening story, which is very powerful. It's elegant, and people are like, I see what you did there.
Yeah.
And especially if you can make them laugh in Act 1, and then you can bring back that humor
laugh.
when you talk, then that's a great way
that
of
makes so
running
much
it.
sense.
And then along the way in Act 2,
Yeah.
I would just make sure to sprinkle some storytelling. So, that's also one of the things I say when I coach is when you come up with your topic, make sure it's something where you actually have experience and stories to share, right? Because then you can naturally bring in those stories throughout.
Yes.
And then as far as, I think humor is really important. And so that's one of the things I spend a lot of time on is trying to find ways of fitting in jokes that are, again, relevant to the topic. It could be crazy examples. It could be my own embarrassing stories or something like that. But, just things to lighten the mood along the way. So, you can kind of look at the energy level throughout the talk, right? And so you're trying to, you're not. So if you peak in your intro and then it's just downhill from there, that's not good.
No.
So you're trying to steer it, and then throughout the talk you might have like more serious points and so on, where you bring the energy levels down, and you could I try to maybe lower your voice and stuff like that, and then afterwards you need a joke to bring it up. And so I essentially storyboard my talks and try to pay attention. So it's like I can look at the whole thing and be like, damn, like part 2 of Act 2 is just so boring. It's just data, and it's too. I really need to bring in
Jazz
some
it up.
jokes and so.
Yeah.
So
That's a really good tip.
All super awesome. We're running a little bit over time, but I'd love if there's any additional tips that you really want people to hear that you've come across in your coaching. Is there anything?
As far as speaking?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think the main thing that makes you a good speaker is that it's actually something you care about, and it's something that you're actually passionate about, and so that people really get the feeling that you want to be there and you want to be talking about it. And then I'd say the second thing that's really important, which especially if you work for an agency is hard because they're pushing you to do it, is don't sell on stage, right? And that's also one of the reasons why I advise people against doing the whole pitch intro, like doing your CV intro and all the logos and so on, because people are there at a conference, they paid and they want to learn, and the second they feel like you're selling, they're like, nah,
Yeah.
out.
And that's
So-
a great
And they
way to get
mentally
you.
check
But you
out.
can, but you can do it. You can do it indirectly though.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
instead of directly pitching, you do an incredible presentation, and throughout that presentation, you're showing your expertise. You're showing that you really understand, and so on,
Yeah.
and you're inspiring people to actually then afterwards want to contact you.
Perfect.
So it's inbound, I guess.
Yeah.
It's an inbound. Yeah.
On that note, we're gonna stop it here. We have another episode with Michael coming up, where we're gonna talk a little bit more about conversion rate optimization.
Yep.
So, teaching me and Jen something we know nothing about. But
You're being too modest, I think.
Very good at spending
Okay.
the money, but not
Well,
great at the conversions.
maybe.
I think you're being too modest, but
okay.
thank you.
But thank you so much, and if you're sticking around, thanks for listening, and stick around for an episode 2.
And
coming up.
before we cut off, where can
Yes.
people find you?
Yes.
You can find me on LinkedIn, Michael Aagaard. Aagaard.
We'll write it in the show notes for.
That's the main place to find me. There's my website also, michaelaagaard.com, but that's still under construction. But yeah, LinkedIn is the main place. And thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation with you.
Thank you.
Great
Thank
to
you,
have
Michael.
you. Thank you so much. And yeah, see you in the next episode.
See ya.
Bye.